Hello, welcome back and welcome in. My name is Nikki Wheeler. If you're interested in gaming, go subscribe to my other channel and follow my Twitch to see my gaming live. Now, let's start this video. Today, I'll be discussing Fall Out Boy. They are most known for their songs Centuries, Uma Thurman, and Sugar We're Going Down. They are an emo pop punk band originating in 2001, currently fronting with 4 members: Pete Wentz, Andy Hurley, Patrick Stump, and Joe Troman. Their first album the band released was titled Take This to Your Grave, released in 2003. It was a smart collection of emo-influenced pop-punk tunes. It's long on harmony and the kind of earnest, dual guitar riffing listeners have come to expect from young rockers raised on a diet of hardcore rock and MTV. Like a high school dreamer's homeroom notebook, Take This to Your Grave's margins are littered with impossibly clever turns of phrase. A preliminary scan of the record's song titles is enough to prove this. From the double-time hardcore of Reinventing the Wheel to Run Myself Over, to the shifting dynamics of Homesick at Space Camp, which are both some of the best songs from the album. With Reinventing the Wheel, I think Pete is just saying he's unsure about his future and everyone is telling him to prove himself, and he says that he doesn't have to. It's about growing up, and it looks like there are some relationship ties in there, and the rest of the album is about this one girl. So it would make sense if this one in particular was about relationship. Homesick at Space Camp is about taking in the old with the new, keeping old ties that are important, and also cherishing new friends that come along at different times and places in your life. We then hear Calm Before the Storm, and it dissects the relationship with an almost intellectual mix of casual MTV generation reference making and a dose of self-analysis that pulls in the sadcore anti-hero Bill Callahan. The overall tune of the album is like a romantic hardcore emo and pop punk that has stacked sarcasm, which made Fall Out Boy a new wave not to be messed with. With the second studio album, From Under the Cork Tree, the band fully delivers on their first full-length promise. It does nod a little more to the standard dynamics and production tweaks of pop punk and emo in the mid-2000s like The Used, but in many more ways it's the same album as Grave, a youth-intense blast of pop culture references, pop punk hyperactivity, and the feeling that we'll never understand life. A good portion of the song's lyrics can be quite lengthy, but they have an innate ability to simultaneously acknowledge and deconstruct the sappy emo soliloquy. Patrick himself sounded much better in this album, but I am leaning more towards the debut for lyrical and musical composition. Dance Dance and Sugar We're Going Down are my favorites off this one because it shows the extent the band went and how they pushed themselves to be somewhat different compared to their last one, though, like I said, they tend to retreat back to their sound, but I love that about them. The album has a current of longing to it, of missing regular life and relationships. Lyrically, this album is really impressive. You're bound to find at least one line in any given song that would be considered quotable, and while a few tracks lack in this regard, I challenge anyone to dismiss Pete's very capable songwriting skills. Now, with the third album, Infinity on High, you can feel a visible shift in the music as it has a nocturnal vibe to it, which I think was the goal. With the previous album, the band had gotten up in the realms alongside My Chemical Romance and others, and you can tell it definitely affected them. It was a position that never seemed to rest easy with the guys, and because of this, Infinity on High seems a bit conflicted, but I really like it surprisingly. It may not be their best album, but it sure did try. The lyrics are oftentimes resentful, full of fame-induced angst, and really emphasize the need to drive home his position that stardom has not changed the band. Previously, they could easily skip around with pop baggage, hardcore tension, and cunning wordplay without losing their edge. Now they just seem kind of self-aware. Again, I can sort of disregard some of the edge being worn because of the newfound fame and see that the group wanted to try something new while staying true to their sound. On Infinity, Stump makes his first major transition from pop-punk crooner to pop star diva, taking full advantage of his vocal range. His high notes are higher, his runs are more daring, and his melodies are tighter. With the band now fully incorporating R&B, pop, and soul elements, it provided the perfect platform for a star to appear right before our very eyes. Then you have the fourth album, Folie à Deux, which was the big one before the hiatus. I personally think that this is the best album the band had made because it is sonically consistent through and through. It is also one of the most catchy and reminds me of Panic at the Disco, which is one of my favorite bands from this time period. So it was very nice to hear. Also, Brendan Urie did provide some of the vocals for the album, so that's probably why it does remind me of them. Vocally speaking, it is also really strong and is more ethereal with hints of soul and R&B, since lifted from a new wave singles and retro hits alike. I don't think I can choose a favorite from this album, but I do know some of the best songs were She's My Winona, America Sweethearts, and What a Catch Donnie. A band's last album before disappearing for a few years should be a great send-off, and this doesn't disappoint. Musically, this album isn't lacking. Patrick sounds undoubtedly the best compared to any other 2000s Fall Out Boy album, and you can see that clearly in What a Catch Donnie. This and America Sweethearts both provide that feeling of warm and optimistic energy. I took She's My Winona as a track of self-doubt and compares a possible relationship with that of Winona Ryder and Johnny Depp from the 90s. In reality, it could be very broad and subject to anything. This album, to me, is a good night driving album because it isn't overly subtle like a lot of pop punk and is a less mellow version of early 2000s music in general, especially for the band. The fifth album from the band was released 5 years after the last, and the hiatus had helped the band a copious amount. It was the first album they achieved #1 in more than 6 years on Infinity on High. The title, Save Rock and Roll, originated as a tongue-in-cheek remark after Wentz envisioned album reviews that would sarcastically state that the band came back to save rock and roll. It was also partially inspired by the return of rock-based acts. Even though the album gained so much success, I think it is one of the lower ranked albums just based on the fact that I just don't like too many of the songs. I can maybe name 4 off the top of my head that I would genuinely repeat, and they were all songs that quote-unquote blew up and made the album successful. With that, though, the songs that were popular were extremely good, but with any radio hit, it got overplayed really, really quickly. The Phoenix solidified what they were trying to get across from the record, which was the idea of old and new clashing. To me, there isn't much redeemable about the album musically or sonically. It is another rock record with good guitars, and I understand the radio appeal, but it wasn't the Fall Out Boy from Folie à Deux like I enjoyed. With the next album, though, American Beauty, American Psycho, it is a new wave of pop rock with some of the original feeling of 2000s punk. Some of my favorite tracks were Uma Thurman, Novocaine, and American Beauty, American Psycho. This record definitively grapples with a host of percolating pop trends from the 2010s. Ever since they began to have hits in 2006, Fall Out Boy have taken great efforts to incorporate whatever was happening on the charts, which was an inclination that isn't quite as necessary in the great digital dissociation of the 2010s, yet this inclination does give American Beauty, American Psycho a bit of a kinetic kick. The album is quirky, a record built on the debris of the last 4 decades of consumer culture. Songs are anchored on samples of Suzanne Vega on Centuries, or better yet, a bizarre appropriation of the Munsters theme from Uma Thurman, where the Halloween Surfer Swing attempts to replicate the sexy menace of Pulp Fiction. These are essentially accents on the record that fully incorporate Pete Wentz's rock and roll savior aspiration with Patrick Stump's eager, earnest soul. The 7th album, Mania, reminded me of the early 1975 with how they delved into the new genre, but they didn't excel nearly as well as Healy and his group. This album incorporates EDM, which was extremely hot at the time with Marshmello coming back into the spotlight. The song Young and Menace failed to do the band justice when it came to the new genre, so they scaled back their electronic aspirations, but didn't quite abandon them entirely when it came to finalizing the 10 tracks featured on the album. Instead of making Fall Out Boy seem fresh, these electronic inflections wind up hinting at the group's age, as this frenetic music never seems to come as easily as the familiar amped-up blue-eyed soul and heady pop punk. That transparent sense of labor does indeed make Mania seem manic. I think it is just very hard to do EDM well because it really takes a keen ear to fully understand it. So going into this nearly blind, Wentz and Stump were practically set up for failure with this one. but it isn't all bad. They did have their moments, like on The Last of the Real Ones. It is a love song that uses celestial imagery to illustrate the gravity of the narrator's devotion. Then we go another 5 years before the 8th album, So Much for Stardust. It's a soaring style they've been threatening to unleash ever since returning to regular activity following their original hiatus in 2008. Although their subsequent follow-ups like Save Rock and Roll, American Beauty, American Psycho, and Mania all topped the Billboard 200, the albums often felt like the band were working hard to stay current, throwing their songs into a production blender of contemporary pop, hip-hop, and EDM sounds with varying degrees of success. Some of the productions doing better than others. So Much for Stardust has a homecoming feeling, as if they were getting back to their roots. From the start, there's a balance of measured craftsmanship and big melodic hooks, all elusively delivered. Some of my favorites include the titular track So Much for Stardust, Hold Me Like a Grudge, and Love from the Other Side. All three of these tracks, along with a lot of the album, bring back much of the sound and vibes that Folie à Deux and previous album warranted. Granted, I can see the disappointment for many original fans from the debut, but I think the major discrepancy there is that music and bands have to grow with the times, and I think Fall Out Boy taking their time throughout the pandemic to return to their original sound, including some of the trending sounds, was just what they needed to stay in the ring long enough for their next big break. I personally don't want to repeat a Mania, so I would gladly wait another 5 years to get a good sounding album from them. People from their original breakthrough need to give them so much more credit for being able to take in the reception and at least try to appease them at all, rather than continuing down the path they were going. The album itself was a multitude of sounds, rebellious, energetic, and even sometimes raunchy, all connecting back to the rock and roll world. I loved it, and I can't say which of the songs was a top one, though I can plead much more for Hold Me Like a Grudge. I recommend this album for more beginner listeners of Fall Out Boy, then move into the earlier work. Anyways, I think this is where I'll be moving into the rankings of the albums, and this will be a best to worst scale. At number 1 is Folie à Deux, number 2 is So Much for Stardust, number 3 is Take This to Your Grave, number 4 is American Beauty, American Psycho, number 5 is From Under the Corkboard, number 6 is Save Rock and Roll, number 7 is Infinity on High, and number 8 is Mania. I was quite torn between putting American Beauty, American Psycho, and From Under the Corkboard in the same spot, so I would take those two with a grain of salt because I am very indecisive. Anyways, overall, Fall Out Boy has been a wonderful band to watch grow and try new things even when they don't work. I love the work they do and put into their music, and I do believe the hiatus did help them grow as individuals, which in turn made the band better and bigger than ever. I recommend them in their early work if you like the 2000s pop, punk, and rock genres. Now, I will be ending the video here, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Comment down below what topic I should cover next, and until next time, bye guys.